Hello there, and thank you for tuning in to the Designated Pundits. By now, you know what we're doing. 30 Major League Soccer teams to preview in January and February this year before MLS season starts. Today, we're talking about Sporting Kansas City. So just like the graphic says there, hit that subscribe button. Make sure you follow us on your favorite podcast platform. You can go over to thedesignatedpundits.com or just search for the Designated Pundits anywhere you'd like. Hit that subscribe button and it'll help us bring you videos like this each and every year. This is about probably the fourth season preview we were doing here with Sporting KC and Jimmy Mack from No Other Pod. A friend of the show. We were talking earlier about what a friend of the show meant, and I think the more famous you are, the less appearances you need before you become a friend of the show. Like, trying to think, any players we've had friends of the show automatically. Jimmy, I think on this, you're definitely in the friend of a show category here.
Awesome. Thank you. Well, it's not because I'm famous. It's just because I've been on here a number of times.
But if you were a Sporting KC soccer fan, you might be a little bit of a household name. You guys have had a really great podcast over there for a long time now. Let us know a little bit about where we can find your work.
Yeah. So my co-host, Daniel Kuzner, and I, we started No Other Pod back, 2017. And we've been doing it essentially every week since. It was September 2017. And Sporting Kansas City had just won the U.S. Open Cup after defeating the New York Red Bulls at Children's Mercy Park. And we started a podcast, learned a lot along the way, and now we are have been for a couple of years, part of the Kansas City Sports Network. So it's a local podcast network that covers any and all professional and college sports in the greater KC area. So you can check us out, KCSN Soccer, wherever you get your podcasts, and on YouTube. And we have both Sporting Kansas City and KC Current coverage every week.
Love it. Let's talk about your favorite soccer memory from 2024. That's how we're starting every show this year.
Ooh, that's a tough question because there wasn't, at least on the men's side, there was not a lot of good. But if it comes down to just non-MLS favorite soccer memory, just favorite soccer memory in general, it's hands down the opening of CPKC Stadium, the first home opener for the Kansas City Current, the first purpose-built women's professional sports stadium. That place was rocking. It was such a fun game, and I couldn't get back to that stadium enough. If you're ever in the Kansas City area, I cannot recommend enough. Try your best to get to CPKC Stadium and see the Current play because it's awesome.
Now, unfortunately, we do have to talk about something a little less on the positive note. 2024 recap for Sporting Kansas City. 8-7-19 record in Major League Soccer with a 6-5-7 home record. 2 wins, 3 draws, and 12 losses on the road. 51 goals scored and 66 goals conceded, left you with a minus 15 goal differential, and you missed the playoffs by 16 points. Certainly a disappointing season, and, it could have been mediocre if you had gotten a little more than 2 wins at home, 2 wins on the road. That was not the case. You guys were as predictable as could be when you left Kansas City. Talk about 2024 a little bit.
Yeah, so it's hard to talk about 2024 without also talking a little bit about 2023 because in so many ways they are parallel seasons. 2023, Sporting Kansas City started off absolutely terrible, dug themselves into a hole, got healthy partway through the season, and then they were able to put it together enough to make a run to the playoffs, won the play-in game, and had a little bit of a run, which I think the reason I bring up 2023 leading into 2024 is because it, I would say, gave a false sense of confidence in terms of what the 2024 team was realistically capable of, because they did put it together in the second half of 2023, had a great run, and were one of the top 2 or 3 teams in terms of points per game over the final few months of MLS regular season to make that run. So Peter Vermees, being at the time still the manager, head coach, and sporting director, looks at it, goes, okay, well, we got healthy, we put it together, let's run it back and see what happens. 2024 starts much the same that 2023 did, and they start digging themselves into a hole a little bit. I would say the biggest difference between 2023 and 2024 is injuries weren't really an excuse in 2024 the same way they were in 2023. In 2023, when you were, winless through 10 games, you at least had the light at the end of the tunnel of, well, we're missing all of our DPs for some of these games. We're missing key players. 2024, yes, there were some injuries here and there, but there wasn't two or three designated players who were battling back from injury on the horizon coming back. That team was what that team was. And what was perhaps most frustrating, not just probably for the teams, but for the fans, is on the whole, Sporting Kansas City in 2024 would play any given game somewhere between like 75 and 80 minutes of pretty good soccer. And then they would play 10 to 15 minutes of just like, what are we doing soccer? And just mental errors, especially on the defensive side of the ball, where, they be up 2-0 in the first half against the LA Galaxy and end up losing. And there's just time and time and time again, they'd be in a position to get points and get a result, and they'd give up silly goals. And it became a feature, not a bug, despite what Peter said. And it just was insurmountable.
I'm looking now at your heat map for like the minute ticker, where it shows like green if you're in the positive for goals, and it looks like the first half of it looks like, when you remember that, like that bubble gum that was like fruity flavored, and it was like green and orange and yellow and red, and it's just like all random colors. But then at the 75th minute, it's like dark burgundy from then on. Not looking great there, but for our purposes here on the show, quite a predictable team. You did get a little hot streak, 3 wins, a draw, and 2 losses heading into leagues. Maybe that might not have been a great time to pull the plug on that season. Looked like you got a little hot streak there, but yeah, unfortunately, a member of the 10 game winless streak club from 2024. Let's take a look at the contributors who scored the goals. William Agata, 10 goals, 3 assists. Eric Tommy, spelt wrong, 7 goals, 4 assists. I have to call myself out. I make all these graphics on my own. Alan Polito, 7 goals, 4 assists. Johnny Russell, 4 goals, 3 assists. And Memo Rodriguez, 2 goals, 5 assists. A little bit about the contributors from 2024. I'm looking right now. 2 of the 5 are no longer with the club. Alan Polito and one of my all-time favorites, Johnny Russell, who, when he wasn't cutting inside and shooting with his left foot, he was growing his beard. I just imagine him just conditioning it all the time. Goal scorers here.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. So Alan Polito, he was the club record signing back, from the 2019 into 2020 offseason. And then pretty quickly, you could tell as a Sporting player or Sporting KC fan when he signed that, okay, this guy's got a different level of talent. And then just over the 5 years, all the way through 2024, just battled injuries the entire time. Never could really live up to that, reported $10 million signing, designated player deal. Now, the weird thing is, again, between 2023 and 2024, he gets signed to a contract extension that raises his salary to a reported $4 million, following probably his best season, 14 goals, and I want to say 5 or 6 assists, which again, for a $10 million DP striker,
sure,
still probably isn't what you want. And then, yeah, as you can see, couldn't really do it, battled injuries again this past year. Johnny Russell, I love him. He's a club legend. He probably, in my opinion, will be up on the Sporting Legends wall one day with his name up there, even though he didn't get a trophy. He deserves it, I think. But age was catching up to him. And so, yeah, you have William Agata, who was not the starter, but kept finding himself in the right place at the right time to score goals. Just a true poacher of a striker, if you will, who has great hold-up play and could get his head on the end of the ball. He's up there. Eric Tommy, he played a lot as the number 10 in the midfield, even though it's not his natural position. He actually was much more successful in terms of both goals and assists on the wing in terms of like per 90 contributions. And then Memo Rodriguez, I think if you would have asked anybody before the season if Memo Rodriguez is in the top 5 in terms of like goal contributions on this team in 2024, is that good? And probably nobody would say yes, because that was not what he was brought in to do. He was brought in really essentially as a depth piece. So I think this just really speaks to there wasn't that killer attacking player consistently available for Sporting Kansas City in 2024.
Absolutely. And I do want to point out Alan Polito, because it'll be the last time I tell this story. When he was signed, I kind of went down the rabbit hole, and I'm like, he was linked to some story of like a kidnapping, wasn't he? Yeah, he like
Yep.
fought a gun out of a kidnapper's hand and escaped through a window. Like, yeah, his origin story was fantastic for the Sporting
Wild.
KC movie.
Yeah. Yeah. And now he's back with Chivas and scored in his first game back in Mexico. So that's how it goes.
Was a bit of a year of change for Sporting KC. Some outgoing, incoming players we're going to talk about. On the defense, Andre Fontas, Robert Castellanos are out. Goalkeeper Tim Melia. You have some midfielders, Remy Voltaire, Denny Flores, Ozzy Cisneros, and then forwards, Johnny Russell, Alan Polito. We've touched on those a little bit. Other players here that you're going to miss?
I mean, Tim Melia, again, if you want to talk about potential club legends, he's right up there. I mean,
Absolutely.
his story is just so cool. Signed in 2015, was a pool goalkeeper that bounced around, was not brought into Sporting Kansas City to be a starter. We had a big name goalkeeper from Chile named Luis Marin, who was supposed to be the starter. That fell apart quick. I think it took like 4 or 5 games for them to mutually part ways, and there was no choice but to put Tim Melia in between the sticks. And it was like 270 starts later for Sporting Kansas City. He's still there, and he's probably a club legend, and had a goalkeeper of the year season in there. I think probably should have got a look for the U.S. men's national team somewhere along the way, just because I think he earned it, even if it's just for a Gold Cup or something. Never quite happened, but he's a big loss. And we go from a seasoned goalkeeper who has been here for essentially 10 years to John Pulskamp, who's a 23-year-old keeper with a little bit of experience, but he's certainly not got the experience that Tim Melia did. So that's a big question mark, is will Pulskamp be able to grab hold of that true number one goalkeeper spot? I don't know. And then, as you mentioned, yeah, Andreu Fontes had one best 11 season. Was kind of the outlier in his time with Sporting Kansas City. Made decent money, well over $1 million for much of his time here per year, and just always was prone to mistakes. Castellanos was sort of a band-aid to try to help fix some of the holes in the back line. And Remy Voltaire, he was a solid midfielder for Sporting Kansas City, but just again, not quite the level that needed to be there for championship competition.
As far as incoming players, you have Mason Toye, Davon Jovelich, Manu Garcia, and Shapi Suleimanov.
Suleimanov, yeah. Now, that's what's interesting about Garcia and Suleimanov is they both come from the same team over in the Greek Super League. They were sort of a package deal, and sort of a combined $5 million total transfer deal.
Sure.
Manu Garcia, he's listed as one of the two new designated players for Sporting Kansas City. He is the designated player number 10. And when Sporting KC hired Mike Burns last year to be the new sporting director, they split off. And this is probably, if we're going to talk about what's probably the most important change for Sporting Kansas City, it is the separating of the head coach and manager role and the technical director role, because Peter Vermees held both. And for a while in MLS 1.0, even MLS 2.0, you could do that. It wasn't uncommon back in the day, whether it be Peter Vermees or Bruce Arena or Caleb Porter. Like there were examples of coaches being able to do both jobs. It's not possible realistically in MLS anymore. Bruce Arena is still trying to do it in San Jose. We'll see. Peter tried to do it until this last year.
Berhalter trying to do it.
Berhalter's trying to do it. I don't think it makes sense in modern MLS to do it anymore. You need somebody who can entirely devote their time to scouting and getting deals across the line. And Peter Vermees even talked about it specifically with Manu Garcia and Shapi Suleimanov. He goes, I don't know if these deals get across the line if Mike Burns is not able to fly over there and ensure that these deals get across the line. And I could not have done that because I had to be here coaching the team as we get through preseason. So that's really interesting. We now have a designated player number 10 in Manu Garcia. He's not certainly not a Lionel Messi name that's coming in that midfield.
Yeah. So
he's going to be an instant game changer.
I checked in on him a little bit, and I, caught him with the Man City under 23s, and it is like a different loan or a different squad every year for the last 6 seasons. I see Teloise on there. A whole bunch of squads, especially from Greece, that I cannot pronounce. And now about 3.6 million euro, whatever that comes out to, 5 million total package to Sporting KC. We will see very soon what he has in the tank for sure.
Yeah, I mean, he's a younger guy. I mean, the highlights that I've seen, which granted, take this with a grain of salt because if you're watching a highlight package, it's by definition their best plays. But some of the highlights that you see, he looks creative. He looks like he has some talent on the ball. That's what Sporting Kansas City needs is a creative spark. I love Eric Tommy, but when he was in that number 10 spot in the midfield, the way I like to say is he's of German nationality and he's very German in his play style. He gets the ball, he drives forward, he goes direct at the goal. He's not that traditional puller of the strings in the midfield, number 10, sort of that Gary Kinda was back in the day for Sporting. So if Garcia can do that, that's great. That allows Eric Tommy to float a little bit more on the wing, and that's something that's going to be really interesting to see how that plays out this year for Sporting Kansas City.
Absolutely. Let's take a little look at this depth chart that I threw together. Now, I threw this together, and for each and every one of these 30 Major League Soccer teams, I'm posting them beforehand online to get fan feedback, hear
Mhm.
what the people say. I think obviously speaking with experts is great, but sometimes just speaking to Twitter, you get a lot of
You
opinions
get feedback.
unfiltered. Yeah, that's never been an issue. So let's start here. John Pulskamp, league average goalie.
Yeah, probably. I mean, what's interesting is I would say he's never had a true consistent run of play to get in form for a goalkeeper. And I think goalkeeper maybe more than any other position, it's so important that they be able to get in a rhythm and get in that run of play. He's had spells of like 6, 7 games in a row before he gets yanked again, and you're
Yeah.
starting to see it, and then Tim comes back. So can you do it for a year? We'll find out.
Well, we see like with Zach Stefan doing that. Going to a big club matters a lot, but if you're going to sit on the bench, you're going to sit on the bench, and you're not going to get better as a player. So I definitely like to see
Right.
goalkeepers. We'll keep an eye on that throughout the season. At the center back position, I have
Yeah.
Rosero. Behind them, Volader, Ian James. Is that your starting pair? And what does the depth chart look like behind them?
That's the ideal starting pair, I think. So for as much movement as there's been in the attack, which we haven't fully dove into that yet, which I'm sure we will. For as much movement in terms of additions in the attack, there really hasn't been that yet in the back line. And some would argue, understandably so, that the back line was the biggest weakness of Sporting Kansas City last year. Joaquin Fernandez was signed on a year and a half deal halfway through last year, again, sort of as like okay, we need something, we need a band-aid. He played, I want to say, 6 or 7 games for Sporting last year. Didn't have an off season, didn't really get a chance to get used to the team. So curious to see how he plays this year. But yes, ideally, he and Danny Rosero, they are those two starting center backs. They've both been battling injuries this offseason. I don't know that either of them, honestly, are going to be available necessarily for this CONCACAF Champions Cup game against Inter Miami. Right before we hopped on this podcast, they did announce that they signed their first round MLS Super Draft pick, Jansen Miller. So it is possible that he may get some time at center back as well, particularly since Ian James, he's a great potential talent. He's a 16-year-old academy kid, homegrown. So it's really hard for a 16-year-old to step in Major League Soccer at center back. So I would probably say Jansen Miller, as of an hour ago, is officially on the depth chart behind Danny Rosero. And then Volader was a U22 player. He's got some experience. He's athletic, but Fernandez is certainly the guy there.
Okay, awesome. Let's get to the fullbacks. What is your dream pair? And if you will, what are they responsible for? Are they expected to get upfield like some of the modern fullbacks, or are they going to lay back?
No, it's a great question, and 100%. They are very attacking minded in Peter Vermes' system. The fullbacks are constantly pushing high up the field in the attack, overlapping with those wingers, letting the wingers cut inside if need be, or the fullbacks themselves cutting inside, doing a little bit of interplay with the winger. Logan and Denbei, 100% when he's healthy is the starting left back. He sort of had his breakout moments a couple years ago in the playoffs against St. Louis City, and just was a killer of that club, scoring bangers from distance, both in the drubbing that Sporting KC gave at City Park in St. Louis, and then again when they sealed it at home in the second game. Kyrie Shelton obviously has a lot of people have a lot of thoughts on Kyrie Shelton. He started as a winger. He's played striker for Sporting Kansas City. He has since been moved to right back almost out of necessity. But what I will say about Kyrie Shelton, particularly in the latter half of last year, when he consistently played at right back out of necessity and started to learn the position more, he started to get decent. I would say at right back. He's not going to be a best 11 right back, but he's a big guy. He's very athletic. He's 6'3". He's obviously got that attacking mindset, but he's learning how to stay in line with the rest of the back line. He's learning where to be positionally on the defensive side of the ball. So serviceable, I would say. I would love for Sporting Kansas City to bring in a true right back that can really grab hold of that position, but Kyrie's the best that they have right now.
Now, moving up to the midfield, this is the spot where my depth chart, and I keep, besides these graphics, I keep my own spreadsheet of all 30 Major League Soccer teams, and I have color coded by skill level and, stars for DPs, all this stuff. Midfield, I got 5 guys for 3 positions. I don't have anyone that is not on this graphic. Maybe you can fill in some holes for me. But I have Jake Davis and Nemanja Radoja as the kind of first 2 guys up. Can you just talk about how they, what the responsibilities are, and whether you have like 2-8s, 8-6, what they're going to be on the field?
Yeah, so Radia definitely plays a little bit more of a traditional 6. He will get up a little bit at times, but it's I would say Peter Vermeer's system. They call it a number 10. It's almost like 2 8s and a 6. That is sometimes there's a 10-8-6. They were playing a little bit of a double pivot with 2 defensive midfielders last year, again, sort of out of necessity. But Radia, he'll definitely stay back. He's more of that traditional holding midfielder, defensive midfielder, number 6, that just sits in front of the back line and tries to connect the back line to the rest of the attack in the midfield. Jake Davis, he is, man, he's potentially the X factor for Sporting Kansas City this year.
He's
He's
also
young.
potentially a player you've never heard of, so I'm going to be listening very intently here because he was buried on my depth chart before we talked about him earlier today.
And what's interesting is he was voted the Sporting Kansas City team MVP last year. Not necessarily because he was banging in goals left and right. He did have, oh gosh, I want to say it was something like 3 goals and 5 assists last year, I think, in MLS play. But he's an academy player, originally a midfielder, and then he moved to right back again out of necessity and started to look like he's got a real future at right back, and was doing pretty well. And then the midfield last year just was decimated with injuries. They had like 2 midfielders available. And so out of necessity, Peter said, let's move Jake back to the midfield. And he played all 3 positions across the midfield for the majority of the season last year. And he hit another gear. I mean, he's a young guy. I want to say he's 23 years old, but he brought that midfield to life. And he is such a talent that can really play in from box to box. He can be that sort of defensive midfield destroyer, but he's got a little bit of a creative spark. That's why he's so good in that sort of number 8 role that helps connect Radia to what will be Garcia and the rest of the front line. So if there is one name that, if you're not a Sporting KC fan and there's one name you have not heard of on this list that I want you to pay attention to in 2025, it's Jake Davis. Watch Jake Davis, watch the talent he has. I would not be surprised if in the next 2 to 3 years we're seeing a big money transfer from Jake Davis over to Europe if his trajectory continues as it did last year.
We've touched a little bit on Manu Garcia, and just what do we think he's going to be on the field? What do we think his best talents are?
Yeah, he's by everything that I can tell, and every way that they're talking about him, he's a true number 10. I mean, he's going to come in and he is going to be the creative spark pulling the strings that Sporting Kansas City has not had in the midfield for a handful of years. I mean, when you think back to the last time, I mean, Gadi Kinda was pretty good at it, but he faced some injuries, and that's why they brought in Eric Tommy. And then there was always this who's really the number 10 for Sporting. But I mean, I think back to the last time Sporting Kansas City really had a consistent number 10, and this will say something to you, Benny Feilhaber. And it was Benny Feilhaber's first run with Sporting Kansas City before he went to Colorado and LAFC and then came back on a short deal. But Sporting has been searching for that creative spark in the midfield ever since Benny left back in sort of the late 2010s. And so they're really hoping that Manu Garcia can be that guy pulling the strings, connecting the rest of the midfield and the back line to the front 3, opening those passing lanes and setting up stuff for shadowy, probably Tommy and Jovic in the front line.
Awesome. So now let's move up and talk to these wingers. Daniel Shalby's got a new partner in Eric Tommy this year. I guess not technically new, but we expected Johnny Russell out there on the right wing for so long. Loved seeing him there. One of my favorite MLS players, certainly from Sporting KC. And you do have Suleimanov. Close.
Suleimanov is how I've been saying it. I don't know. I haven't met him yet. Hopefully on Tuesday I'll get to talk to him. But Suleimanov is my best guess, if I'm gonna be honest.
Awesome. Let's discuss these wingers, because you do have quite a few on the depth chart here of considerable quality.
Yeah, the front line is definitely at this point the strength, both in terms of depth and quality for Sporting Kansas City. Eric Tommy is probably going to start on the wing, probably on the right side, although he prefers the left. He's been playing on the right for much of the preseason, so that's probably where we'll see him. Shapi Suleimanov, he's the one who's coming over from Greece with Mono Garcia. He is a TAM player. Part of that might be because of how they have assigned and amortized the fee that was part of bringing him over. But when you have a TAM attacker, which I'm sure your listeners know, but basically a TAM player is they're above the maximum budget charge, but they're still able to be bought down so they don't have to qualify as a designated player. When you have a TAM attacker, I think you expect that they're going to have an impact. You don't want to be spending that level of money on a yearly basis to somebody who's just buried on the depth chart. So it'll be really interesting to see how quickly he can integrate into the club and really get a feel for things and start being a contributor. Now, on the other side, this is where it gets interesting. Daniel Shalhoub, he's been around this club for a while. He's a former finalist for the MLS MVP trophy. He's had some very good seasons. He had a very, very poor last couple of seasons, if we're being honest. He is the one that, as synonymous, honestly, as he is with this team, and he's one of the more experienced players in this system now, he's the one that if he doesn't put it together and Suleimanov starts integrating pretty well into this team, I wouldn't say it's out of the question to see a starting winger pair of Eric Tommy and Shapi Suleimanov with Daniel Shalhoub having to work his way back into the system if he doesn't hit the ground running.
Yeah, and he's not an old guy, but I remember it must have been 2020, and we had you on for the 2021 preview, and I said something about him like he's gonna have a great year, and that was the year he scored like 16 goals or something, like just off the hook.
Year.
But he's only had 2 career seasons over 10, and he had struggled with injury and just to put anything together, quite honestly, before that. So he may be a player that the flash has been brighter than the star there, you know?
Yeah. He's got the potential there. It's just, he's also very streaky. Like he'll go on runs of he doesn't score a goal for like 13 straight games. And then suddenly he'll have a game with like 3 goals and you're like, oh, okay, there it is. But that's, you can't do that consistently in this league and hold on to your spot, especially when you have other talented wingers. We haven't even talked about Steven Afrifa or Alenis Vargas, who, again, very young, very raw players, but very got quite a lot of potential. Steven Afrifa was somebody who bared more responsibility last year in his rookie campaign as he got more familiar with the club. I think it was his rookie campaign. It might have been his second year. Time is hard to remember at this point. And Alenis Vargas, again, very young, very, very raw, but super fast. His body moves quicker than his mind moves at times. If he can sort of get take it down half a notch and just sort of get himself under control a little bit, he's a guy who he's not going to be a starter this year by any means, but he can be a contributor and in a couple of years could be a dangerous playmaker.
And now up top, you have the new striker, Dejan Joveljic from LA Galaxy. I'm really interested to find out what you know, because I know there's a lot of excitement around this name. He was a prolific goal scorer in his time with LA. He had to be. I mean, look at the parts around him. I have seen him play, and he scores some wonder goals. You know, just a rocket into the back of the net. But a lot of his stuff has been, for me, kind of like these pedestrian goals. He has so many empty looks at the net, and to me, I don't think that he is like a superstar quality player. I hope that I am wrong. I hope that he can prove me wrong, and I'm going to eat my words. I'm sure everyone from Sporting Kansas City will be tweeting me this year every time he scores a goal, and I will have deserved it. I just don't see him being that big of a step over William Agata, who I wanted to see play 30 games this year.
Yeah, so I think that's the big question that I've seen a number of people have is they're like, why would you, when Alan Polito was transferred out, which let's start there just for a moment. Alan Polito, he signed that brand new contract before last year that was going to keep him around for I think another 2 years at least. And then over a span of about 6 or 7 weeks in this offseason, a deal came together where ultimately he was transferred to Chivas for I think about $1.5 million is the reported fee, which honestly, great. That's awesome business from Sporting KC's
Yeah.
perspective. Um, that is the only reason that Dejan Jovic is on this team. Mike Burns has said as much. If Alan Polito had not been transferred, this move would not have been possible. So that combined with the brand new transfer mechanism within MLS, where you can basically do cash transfers within the league that are not using allocation money, Dejan Jovic was the first one that happened from LA to Sporting KC for $4 million. A lot of people, like you said, they're like, you got a guy in William Agata who is, in terms of all of the advanced stats, you look at G plus, you look at expected goals, you
Yeah.
you look at actual goals scored. I mean,
21 goals and 37 90s.
yeah, he's very impressive. He's very young and he's very affordable. Um, this is one of those cases where I think Peter and Burns there's a couple things going on here. I think they're hedging their bets a little bit because a couple seasons ago, Willie missed extensive time with a broken leg. So hopefully it's not like a ligament injury. It's not a recurring thing, but you never know. There's a season where he missed extensive time. And we have been burned by having two good strikers that were both injured at the same time. So I think
Sure.
they were worried about having just one. Um, and two, and this is not a indictment of William Agata because I think he has the potential to be an all-star caliber striker for Sporting Kansas City. But I think if you look at this is where you have to find that balance between art and science, if you will, in terms of watching what's happening on the field and looking at the stats or even the advanced stats. Because as good as Agata is in terms of G plus or in terms of expected goals or whatnot, there are times when, for whatever reason, he's just got easy goals that he should be scoring that he's just not getting on frame, or he is the king of bouncing it off the post. I can't tell you how many times he has hit a ball off the post, which again, at some point you think it should self-correct, but there have been enough times where it's like, oh, Willie, like you needed to put that one away. And so I think that was probably part of the thinking with Jovic. Now, also, we've been assuming this entire time, I think rightfully so, or deservedly so, that we're going to see a 4-3-3 formation from Sporting Kansas City. Peter Vermees has also talked about that there may be some experimentation with the formation given some of the roster moves that they've made. So I would say it's not out of the realm of possibility that in some way maybe we see a 4-4-2 and we have both Agata and Jovic on the field at the same time.
The way this team was giving up goals last year, I would love to see them experiment with a 5-man back line. You got the wing backs for it. You have the midfield for it. It just seems like it's just kind of obvious to me that it should be tried.
Yeah, I mean, a 5-3-2 or something. Yeah, like I think there are all sorts of things that they could try. And like you said, especially when there were so many defensive deficiencies and just too much space. Set pieces in particular were a big problem. Set piece defending for Sporting Kansas City. So I wouldn't be surprised to see some experimentation and see more of a 5-man back line with some wingbacks.
Peter Vermees has a lot of power for this team, so let's get into some 2025 storylines. Is he on the hot seat? Is the seat warming up? What does that look like?
Um, I'm never going to say never. So if Sporting KC goes winless in their first 10 games again, like especially after the way the last couple seasons have gone, like that seat's going to start getting pretty hot. I do think, excuse me, I do think by bringing in Mike Burns as a sporting director halfway through last year, and they've been laying the groundwork in their talks with ownership and talking about this rebuild, that this is a 3-window rebuild at minimum, and this winter window was window number one of those three, and I think they've already got more pieces in than they expected. But all that is to say, I wheels would have to fall off pretty quickly and pretty magnificently for Peter Vermees to get fired, especially in midseason. I think they are going to give him 3 windows and Mike Burns 3 windows to try to turn this thing around. Now, having said that, fans in particular and ownership are going to expect year-over-year improvement from last year. If they are, again, bottom of the Western Conference, bottom 2 of the Western Conference, and giving up 65 plus goals and are not competing, we have a problem.
I agree. I will be interesting to check out that story throughout the season. Where can Sporting KC look to improve? You mentioned the right back position a little earlier when we were talking. Are there any other spots where you would like to see them really go and try to get a name?
Yeah.
And that's connected to the second question. How are the financials?
Yeah. So right back and center back, honestly, are places where I'd like to see them bring in more players. They were connected to who would be a U22 signing from Red Bull Leipzig earlier this offseason at center back, a 21-year-old player out of Leipzig. That seems like that hasn't gone anywhere, at least as of now. But Mike Burns has said both the midfield and the back line, they're still looking to add pieces. And Peter Vermees has said more pieces will come. So, like I said, they just signed Jensen Miller. I don't think that's the piece that fans were hoping would come, a super draft pick. But right back is certainly a spot, and a defensive midfielder. I do think Nemanja Radia is a decent player. I don't think he is worth I think he's about like a $1.6 million player per year right now. And he got a contract, I believe, after this year. So I wouldn't be surprised if they look to upgrade that spot as well. And outside of just positions on the field, they need to get better at set piece defending. I mean, you can ask any Sporting Kansas City fan, and set piece goals given up are just an absolute killer. So they need to be better about that. In terms of financials, they should be good. I mean, the ownership has committed to this past offseason a renewed investment and increased investment. And Peter Vermees was not so subtly saying in press conferences that we need more money to compete with other teams. And I mean, they've dropped close to $10 million in the first window since saying that, which is not as much as some other teams, but is a lot for Sporting Kansas City historically. So, for the first window, that's a pretty good, put your money where your mouth is.
Last one. What players could win a starting job this year?
I think the most interesting one may be that striker position between William Agata and Dejan Jovic, particularly because of the fanfare that Jovic has come into. That'll be really interesting to see. And then Stapi Suleimanov, man, he's such an unknown because I don't think many of us are consistently watching the Greek Super League and paying attention to how well the wingers are doing on some of these more obscure teams. But he's a TAM player, and if he can outplay Daniel Shalhoub, he could be a starter, and Shalhoub could move to the bench, like we said before.
Awesome. Now let's move on to some predictions. It's that time. What is a realistic outcome? What's the team's best possible outcome? What do you think the team's worst possible outcome is?
Okay, I think a realistic outcome is fighting to earn one of those last couple playoff spots. Like, this is not a team that's going to compete for a top 4 position in the West. I say that, and this is, where we smash cut to the end of the season, and somehow Sporting Kansas City defied all odds and pulled a 2024 LA Galaxy. But by all indications, they're not going to compete for the top of the West. They could, with the revamped attack and the revamped midfield, compete for maybe that 7th, 8th, 9th spot in the West and try to push for a playoff spot, which would be better than 2024. But that could be realistic. It just depends on, are they going to be able to plug enough of the holes defensively? Best possible outcome is, they probably get that like 6th, 7th spot, and they avoid having to be in a play-in game, but they go on the road in the first round of the playoffs and they probably lose. With the roster right now, at least that would be my guess. I don't see this team going far into an MLS postseason until they are more able to address some of the defensive deficiencies. And they're not going to be able to do that as easily until after this year, because a majority of the defensive players' contracts come off the books after this season. Those contracts expire. That's when the defensive rebuild will start.
All right. I like that a lot. I kind of see it the same way. I was talking 2 days ago with Fabian Rinkel about the San Jose Earthquakes. And I feel like Sporting KC is in the same boat where this could be the most improved team in Major League Soccer and miss the playoffs.
Right, exactly.
That possibility is out there, and I know that stinks to hear, but that's where we are
right.
now. This isn't no longer the league where you make one splash signing and you move up 6 spots on the chart. I mean, you need to put in work. You mentioned a 3 window. I think that could be a realistic goal. I just don't think they're ready yet. I think a play-in round is probably the best outcome, but I think that 8, 9, or 10 spot, if you get there and you circle it and you say right now, that is our goal. We want to get 8, 9, 10 this year, and then 6, 7, 8 next year, and 4, 5, 6 the year after, or the window after that. I think that is a realistic thing. I don't think that this is a bad roster. I think years ago this would actually be a competitive Major League Soccer team. Sure. I just don't think this year with what you have going on in LA that they're going to have a friendly schedule.
Right, and we don't have a Ricky Puig type player or a Gabriel Peck type player who can come in and take one of the worst teams in the league to an MLS Cup champion like the Galaxy did. I don't think that will happen. We were talking on No Other Pod a couple weeks ago, and we had this conversation. We said, what would success be in 2025 for us? And we said, if you can get to the postseason, I think that's about all you can ask for. Even if it's a play-in game, like if you can do that after how poorly the season went last year, I mean, sign me up right now, and I'll take it.
And that would be no small ask to get there for sure. Okay,
no, and that would be 9th. And one last thing I'll say is you asked worst case scenario is a repeat of 2024, and all this money was for naught, and fans are still ready to fire Peter Vermees.
Well, as I like to say, it's not my money, and we're going to find out real soon. Season starts in 9 days. Jimmy, thank you again for coming back, and we'll have to have you on real soon.
Absolutely. Thank you.
You guys got to do something so we can bring you back on to talk about it. You know,
I would love to. If they somehow beat Miami on Tuesday, I'm not counting on it, but if they can in the Champions Cup, then hey, that's a start.
There you go. We'll give you a guest spot then if that happens. I'll have to check that off on the schedule. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you everyone else for checking out the Designated Pundits. Jimmy, one more time, where you can find your work.
Yeah, check us out on KCSN Soccer, wherever you get your podcast, KCSN Soccer on YouTube. You can find me across socials, JCMack03, and No Other Pod on social as well.
Awesome. Thank you again for being here, and thank you everyone else for watching the Designated Pundits.